Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into one of history's most shocking secrets, a time when your innocent Victorian great-great-grandmother was likely higher than a kite every single day of her life. Picture this, it's 1885, and Mrs. Eleanor Hartford steps into her elegant Boston parlour, reaches for her morning medicine cabinet, and consumes more cocaine before breakfast than most people see in a lifetime. But here's the twist. She has no idea she's doing it. None of them did. Welcome to the era when an entire generation of women became accidental drug addicts, all while maintaining perfect posture and impeccable manners. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I'd love for you to join our growing community of history lovers. If you're enjoying this journey through time, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps us share these forgotten stories with more curious minds like yours. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. There's something magical about knowing we're all exploring history together from different corners of the world. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable, and let's step into a world where medicine cabinets were more dangerous than street corners. The year was 1880, and if you walked into any respectable American home, you'd find something that would absolutely shock you today. Every medicine cabinet, every kitchen, pantry, every lady's vanity table was stocked with enough narcotics to supply a modern-day cartel. But this wasn't some underground drug operation. This was perfectly legal, doctor-recommended, and considered the height of civilized living. Let me paint you a picture of Margaret Whitmore's morning routine in Philadelphia, 1883. She wakes up and immediately reaches for her bottle of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. Not for a baby, mind you, but for her own nervous constitution. One spoonful contains enough morphine to knock out a horse, but the label cheerfully promises it will restore feminine tranquility. Next, she applies her complexion cream laced with cocaine to invigorate the skin and awaken natural beauty. She brushes her teeth with cocaine-infused tooth powder, advertised as essential for maintaining moral cleanliness and social acceptability. By 9 a.m., before she's even had breakfast, Margaret has consumed more controlled substances than most people encounter in their entire lives. And she's not alone. She's just following her doctor's orders and the social expectations of a proper Victorian lady. The statistics from this era are absolutely mind-boggling. A single bottle of popular children's cough syrup contained the equivalent of what we'd consider multiple doses of heroin today. Patent medicine sales in America reached $74 million annually by 1900. That's over $2.5 billion in today's money. All spent on products that were essentially liquid addiction in fancy bottles. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. These weren't products hidden in dark alleys or sold by shady characters. They were advertised in ladies' magazines, endorsed by prominent physicians, and sold in the finest department stores. Macy's in New York had an entire floor dedicated to medicinal preparations for the discerning woman. Sears and Roebuck catalogues featured pages upon pages of cocaine-laced products right next to kitchen appliances and Sunday dresses. Dr. William Hammond, the former Surgeon General of the United States Army, publicly endorsed cocaine as a valuable remedy for mental depression and nervous exhaustion. And the Boston Medical Journal published glowing reviews of cocaine treatments for everything from hay fever to excessive emotionalism in the female temperament. These weren't quack doctors operating from wagon trains. These were Harvard-educated physicians writing in the most prestigious medical publications of their time. The social pressure to use these products was immense. Victorian society had very specific ideas about how women should behave: calm, cheerful, never too emotional, always perfectly groomed and completely devoted to their families. But here's the cruel irony. The very substances they used to achieve this impossible standard were making them increasingly erratic, dependent, and ultimately quite mad. Take the case of Elizabeth Morrison, a well-documented socialite from Boston's Beacon Hill. Her diary, preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society, chronicles her descent from a composed Victorian lady to what she herself described as a creature possessed by demons. It started innocently enough. Her physician prescribed Wagner's coca wine for her melancholic tendencies. Within 6 months, she was consuming 3 bottles daily and had begun experiencing what we now recognize as cocaine-induced psychosis. But the most chilling part, her husband, her doctor, and her entire social circle attributed her increasingly erratic behavior to feminine hysteria and prescribed even stronger medications. The very people who should have helped her were unknowingly pushing her deeper into addiction. The pharmaceutical companies of the era were masterful marketers. They understood that Victorian women were trapped between impossible expectations and limited outlets for frustration. Advertisements didn't just sell medicine, they sold solutions to social problems. Tired of being tired? Try Dr. Peterson's Vigor Tonic. Struggling with domestic burdens? Madame Laurent's Nerve Calmer will restore your natural cheerfulness. Feeling overwhelmed by modern life? Professor Williams' Lady's Friend contains everything you need to face your day with confidence. What they didn't mention was that Professor Williams' Lady's Friend contained enough cocaine to power a small locomotive. The dosages recommended were staggering. A typical nerve tonic contained between 1/8 to 1/4 grain of cocaine per fluid ounce, and the recommended dose was often 2-4 tablespoons, 3 times daily. To put this in perspective, modern medical cocaine use, when it's used at all, involves doses measured in milligrams, not grains. These women were consuming therapeutic doses that would be considered massive even by today's recreational standards. The geographic spread of this phenomenon was truly national. From the bustling cities of the northeast to the frontier towns of the west, from plantation houses in the south to logging camps in the Pacific Northwest, cocaine-laced medicines were as common as coffee and twice as popular. The United States Patent Office records show over 3,000 different patent medicines registered between 1875 and 1905, and an estimated 80% contained significant amounts of cocaine, morphine, alcohol, or combinations of all three. But perhaps most heartbreaking were the testimonials from women who genuinely believed these products were helping them. Letters to pharmaceutical companies preserved in various historical archives reveal the tragic cycle of addiction disguised as medical treatment. "Your wonderful tonic has given me the strength to manage my household duties with grace," wrote one woman, not realizing that her newfound strength was chemical dependence masquerading as feminine virtue. The social consequences rippled through every level of Victorian society. Dinner parties became inadvertent drug-fueled gatherings, church socials turned into unconscious cocaine circles. Women's charitable organizations were unknowingly organized and run by groups of addicted volunteers who attributed their unusual energy and focus to moral superiority rather than chemical stimulation. What makes this historical moment so fascinating and terrifying is how normalized it all became. These weren't dramatic addiction stories in the traditional sense. There were no rock-bottom moments or obvious signs of substance abuse. Instead, it was a slow, society-wide descent into chemical dependency, disguised as the pursuit of health, beauty, and social respectability. The medical establishment's role in this crisis cannot be overstated. Physicians of the era had limited understanding of addiction, virtually no knowledge of drug interactions, and enormous pressure to provide quick fixes for complex social and psychological problems. When a woman complained of depression, anxiety, or simple exhaustion from managing a household without modern conveniences, the easiest solution was a bottle of patent medicine that would make her feel better immediately, regardless of long-term consequences. As we sit here tonight, more than a century later, it's easy to judge the ignorance of the past. But remember, these were intelligent, well-meaning people making the best decisions they could with the information available to them. They trusted their doctors, followed social conventions, and genuinely believed they were taking care of their health and their families. The parallels to our modern world are both obvious and unsettling. We live in an era of prescription opioids, anxiety medications, and an entire wellness industry built on the promise that there's a product for every problem. The packaging has changed, the regulations have improved, but the fundamental human desire for a simple solution to complex problems remains exactly the same. What happened next in this incredible story will absolutely amaze you. Because just as this chemical dependency was reaching its peak, some remarkable women began to notice that something wasn't quite right. Their journey from unconscious addiction to awareness, rebellion, and ultimately reform would reshape American society forever. But that transformation didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen without a fight. In our next chapter, we'll explore how the very pharmaceutical companies that created this crisis became some of the most powerful and manipulative forces in American business history, and how their marketing tactics evolved from simple product promotion to sophisticated psychological manipulation that would make modern advertising executives weep with envy. Now, imagine walking into the boardroom of Park Davis & Company in Detroit, 1884. The mahogany table gleams under gaslight, and around it sit some of the most brilliant marketing minds of the Victorian era. But these aren't selling soap or sewing machines. They're crafting campaigns to hook an entire generation of women on substances that would make modern drug dealers blush. What they created wasn't just advertising, it was the blueprint for America's first corporate-sponsored addiction epidemic. The pharmaceutical industry of the 1880s was operating in what we might call a regulatory Wild West. There were no FDA approvals, no ingredient labeling requirements, no clinical trials, and absolutely no oversight of marketing claims. Into this vacuum stepped companies that would make today's most aggressive marketers look like amateurs. They didn't just sell products, they manufactured demand for solutions to problems they themselves invented. Consider the genius, and I use that term with deep irony, of Dr. Kilmer's Swamp Root campaign. The Kilmer Company didn't just advertise their cocaine-laced kidney remedy. They first launched a massive public education campaign about kidney weakness, a condition that supposedly affected 75% of all American women. Suddenly, perfectly healthy women were diagnosing themselves with symptoms they'd never noticed before. Occasional fatigue, mild back pain, or simple moodiness became signs of this newly discovered epidemic. The numbers behind these campaigns were staggering. By 1895, patent medicine companies were spending more on advertising than any other industry in America, over $40 million annually, equivalent to roughly $1.4 billion today. But here's what makes it even more remarkable. They were spending this money with surgical precision, targeting women's magazines, church newsletters, and ladies' social publications with messages specifically designed to exploit Victorian anxieties about femininity, health, and social status. Have you ever wondered how advertising became so sophisticated so quickly? The patent medicine industry was the laboratory where modern marketing psychology was born. They pioneered techniques we still see today, celebrity endorsements, before and after testimonials, limited-time offers, and the creation of artificial urgency around health concerns. Take the case of Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, which became one of the most successful patent medicines in American history. Lydia Pinkham herself became the first female brand spokesperson, her grandmotherly face appearing in advertisements across the country. The compound contained 18% alcohol and significant amounts of cocaine, but it was marketed as a natural remedy for female complaints, a Victorian euphemism for everything from menstrual cramps to what we would now recognize as clinical depression. The company's marketing was revolutionary. They created detailed pamphlets explaining women's health in language that seemed scientific, but was actually designed to increase anxiety. They established a customer service department, the first of its kind, where women could write letters describing their symptoms and receive personalized advice, along with recommendations for increased dosages. These weren't medical consultations, they were sophisticated sales funnels disguised as healthcare. But perhaps most insidiously, they understood the power of social proof. The company paid women to host Pinkham parties in their homes, where neighbours would gather to hear testimonials about the compound's miraculous effects. These weren't just product demonstrations, they were peer pressure campaigns that transformed drug distribution into social entertainment. Imagine your book club, but everyone's gradually becoming addicted to cocaine-laced tonics and attributing their newfound energy to moral improvement. The pharmaceutical companies also pioneered what we now call lifestyle marketing. They didn't just sell medicine, they sold an identity. A woman who used a Pierce's favourite prescription wasn't just treating her nerves, she was embracing modern scientific womanhood. Someone who relied on Hostetta's celebrated stomach bitters wasn't just managing digestion, she was demonstrating her commitment to progressive American values. The language used in these advertisements was masterfully crafted. Instead of saying contains cocaine, labels would read fortified with natural Peruvian extract. Rather than morphine, they'd list concentrated poppy essence. The word addictive didn't exist in their vocabulary. Instead, they spoke of forming beneficial daily habits and creating healthful dependencies that strengthen feminine constitution. Thus, William Radham's microbe killer provides a perfect example of how these companies manufactured both fear and solution simultaneously. Radham first published pamphlets about the microbe theory of disease, the idea that invisible organisms were causing illness throughout American society. This wasn't entirely wrong scientifically, but Radham's version was designed to create maximum anxiety. He claimed that 99% of all human ailments were caused by microbes, and that most people were walking around infected without knowing it. Then came the solution: Microbe Killer, a pink liquid that contained mercury, hydrochloric acid, and red wine. The marketing promised it would kill every harmful microbe in the human body. The reality was that it was just slowly poisoning customers while making them feel temporarily energetic due to its stimulant properties. But here's the brilliant part. When customers started feeling worse, Radham's literature explained that this was evidence the treatment was working, that they were experiencing beneficial healing reactions as the microbes died off. By 1890, Radham was selling 50,000 bottles monthly and had established distribution networks across the United States, Canada, and even Europe. His success spawned dozens of imitators, each claiming to have discovered an even more effective microbe-killing formula. The competition led to an arms race of increasingly potent and dangerous formulations. The geographic expansion of these companies reads like an invasion plan. They started in major cities, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, where they could access wealthy women and established medical networks. Then they systematically expanded westward following railroad lines and establishing distribution networks in every town with more than 500 residents. By 1900, you could buy patent medicines in general stores from Maine to California, from Minnesota to Texas. The companies understood regional psychology too. In conservative religious communities, they emphasized moral purity and spiritual health. In progressive urban areas, they promoted scientific advancement and modern efficiency. In frontier towns, they promised strength and endurance for harsh living conditions. Same products, different messaging, all designed to make local women feel that these medicines were specifically created for their unique circumstances. But perhaps most cleverly, they created what economists would now call artificial scarcity. Limited edition formulations, seasonal availability, and exclusive regional distributions made women feel they needed to stock up when the opportunity arose. Many households had medicine cabinets that looked more like pharmacies, with dozens of different bottles containing variations of essentially the same cocaine and alcohol formula. The testimonial industry became a sophisticated operation. Companies employed writers to create believable personal stories from fictional customers. They paid real customers to provide enthusiastic endorsements. They even hired actresses to appear at public demonstrations, sharing dramatic before and after stories of their transformations. These weren't just advertisements, they were early forms of pharmaceutical theatre. One of the most successful was Mrs. Joe Person's Remedy, which claimed to cure everything from blood disorders to female irregularities. Mrs. Person herself toured the South, speaking at churches and women's clubs about her miraculous recovery from various ailments. What audiences didn't know was that Mrs. Person's Remedy contained enough cocaine to maintain her enthusiastic energy throughout these grueling speaking tours, creating a feedback loop where the drug's effects validated the testimonials that sold more drugs. The social implications were staggering. Entire communities became inadvertently synchronized in their chemical dependency. Church choirs sang with unusual vigor because half the sopranos were on cocaine-laced throat lozenges. Garden clubs planned increasingly elaborate events because their members were consuming stimulant-infused nerve tonics. Women's suffrage meetings had unusual energy and focus because attendees were unknowingly under the influence of various patent medicines. The economic impact extended far beyond the pharmaceutical companies themselves. Entire industries emerged to support this chemical lifestyle. Specialized glass bottle manufacturers, label printing companies, cork suppliers, and shipping networks. Thousands of Americans found employment in what was essentially a massive legal drug distribution system. But the most tragic aspect was how the success of these marketing campaigns created a self-reinforcing cycle. As more women used these products and experienced their temporary energizing effects, they became living advertisements for pharmaceutical solutions to life's challenges. Their testimonials weren't lies, they genuinely felt better while under the influence. The problem was that better was chemically induced and ultimately unsustainable. The companies also pioneered subscription models, encouraging customers to establish regular delivery schedules for their medicines. This created predictable revenue streams while ensuring customers never ran out of their daily doses. It was an early form of automatic renewal, but instead of magazines or newspapers, people were subscribing to their own addiction. As these marketing empires grew more sophisticated and profitable, they began to attract attention from an unexpected source, the very women they were targeting. Some customers started to notice patterns that the companies hoped would remain invisible. But the story of how Victorian women began to fight back against this corporate manipulation involves some of the most remarkable acts of courage and detective work in American history. Coming up next, we'll step inside the actual homes where this chemical transformation was taking place daily. You'll meet women whose morning routines involved more controlled substances than most people encounter in a lifetime, and discover how the simple act of cleaning house became a gateway to a world of pharmaceutical-induced mania. Picture Sarah Mitchell standing in her pristine Boston kitchen on a Tuesday morning in 1887, armed with what she believes are the tools of domestic perfection. But this isn't your typical cleaning routine. Sarah's cabinet holds bottles of Miracle Kitchen Cleanser infused with enough cocaine to fuel a small army, spotless surface polish containing morphine derivatives, and Heavenly Home Refresher that's basically liquid stimulants disguised as cleaning supplies. What happens next would make even the most dedicated modern housekeeper question everything they thought they knew about spring cleaning. The domestic cleaning industry of the 1880s had discovered something remarkable. If you put cocaine in household products, women would clean with the intensity of someone preparing for a royal inspection. And Victorian society, obsessed with moral cleanliness being reflected in physical cleanliness, embraced this chemical assistance with open arms and tightly closed minds. Sarah's morning routine began at 6 a.m. with what she called her preparation ritual. First, she'd take a generous swig of Dr. Hamilton's Housewife's Helper, marketed as a digestive aid for busy women, but actually containing a cocaine concentration that would make modern emergency room doctors panic. Within 15 minutes, Sarah felt energized, focused, and ready to tackle her domestic duties with what she described in her diary as supernatural vigor. But here's where the story gets truly wild. The cleaning products themselves were equally loaded with stimulants. Mrs. Beaton's all-purpose surface cleaner contained cocaine hydrochloride, marketed as a natural cleaning accelerant that invigorates both surfaces and spirits. The logic, according to the manufacturer's literature, was that cocaine would help women work faster while simultaneously absorbing through the skin to maintain their energy levels throughout the day. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever cleaned your house and felt unusually energetic afterward? These Victorian women were essentially getting high from their housework, but they attributed their manic cleaning sessions to moral superiority and proper feminine dedication. The Pennsylvania Historical Society preserves letters from dozens of women describing their cleaning experiences in terms that sound more like drug testimonials than housekeeping reports. I find myself able to scrub for hours without fatigue, wrote Mary Henderson from Pittsburgh in 1888. The floors shine with such brilliance, and I myself feel illuminated from within. I have reorganized every closet, polished every surface, and still feel capable of tackling the neighbor's home as well. What Mary didn't realize was that she was experiencing a textbook cocaine high while performing domestic labor. Her illumination from within was chemical, her endless energy was pharmaceutical, and her desire to clean the neighbor's house was a classic symptom of stimulant-induced hyperactivity. The product names alone tell an incredible story of marketing genius meeting chemical ignorance. Vigor Our Scrubbing Compound promised to transform tedious housework into invigorating exercise. Sparkling Solutions All-Purpose Cleaner claimed to brighten both your home and your disposition through natural botanical energizers. Efficient Ladies Cleaning Arsenal advertised itself as containing South American plant extracts that enhance both cleaning power and feminine vitality. Every single one of these products contained significant amounts of cocaine, often combined with alcohol, caffeine, and various other stimulants. Women weren't just cleaning their homes, they were essentially conducting chemistry experiments while under the influence of powerful drugs. The economic impact was staggering. By 1890, American households were spending an average of $47 annually on specialized cleaning products, equivalent to nearly 1 cent in today's money. But families weren't just buying 1 or 2 products, they were purchasing entire arsenals of chemically enhanced cleaning supplies each designed for specific tasks and containing different combinations of stimulants. The social pressure to maintain spotless homes using these products was immense. Victorian women competed over the cleanliness of their houses with the same intensity that modern families might compete over their children's academic achievements. But this competition was fueled by chemistry, not just determination. Consider the case of the Hartford Ladies' Domestic Excellence Society, documented in the Connecticut Historical Society archives. This was a social club where women would gather weekly to discuss housekeeping techniques and share product recommendations. What they were actually doing was enabling each other's chemical dependency while disguising it as moral improvement. Meeting minutes from 1889 describe scenes that sound more like drug user support groups than ladies' tea parties. Mrs. Woodbridge shared her discovery of applying Dr. Morrison's surface energizer twice daily, rather than the recommended once, resulting in floors so pristine they seemed to glow with inner light. Miss Patterson demonstrated her technique of combining 3 different cleaning tonics, achieving results that left the entire room sparkling and herself feeling capable of conquering any domestic challenge. These women were essentially comparing drug cocktail recipes while believing they were sharing housekeeping tips. The physical toll was enormous, though rarely recognised for what it actually was. Victorian medical journals from the period document a mysterious epidemic of what they called housewife's trembling, women experiencing handshakes, rapid heartbeats, and episodes of what they termed cleaning frenzy. Dr. James Morrison's 1891 paper in the Boston Medical Review describes patients who would clean obsessively for 8 to 10 hours straight, then collapse in exhaustion, only to repeat the cycle the next day. What Dr. Morrison was actually documenting was cocaine withdrawal and dependency, but neither he nor his patients understood the connection between their cleaning products and their symptoms. Instead, these episodes were attributed to excessive moral dedication, or an overabundance of feminine virtue, expressing itself through domestic perfection. The children in these households were inadvertently caught up in this chemical cleaning culture. Kids playing in freshly cleaned rooms were exposed to cocaine residue on every surface. Many developed what parents proudly called helpful energy, children who would spontaneously organize toy boxes, dust furniture, or engage in other cleaning activities with unusual intensity and focus. In reality, these children were experiencing contact highs from the cocaine-infused cleaning products their mothers used throughout the house. Pediatric medical records from the era show unusual patterns of hyperactivity, sleeping problems, and what doctors called precocious domestic interests among children in wealthy households that could afford the latest cleaning products. The geographic spread of this phenomenon followed economic lines precisely. Wealthy neighborhoods in major cities saw the highest concentrations of chemically enhanced cleaning product use. Department store records from New York's Upper Fifth Avenue show that affluent households were purchasing 3-4 times more cleaning products than middle-class families, and paying premium prices for products with the highest cocaine content. But the middle class aspired to this chemical cleanliness too. Sears and Montgomery Ward catalogues began featuring starter sets of cleaning products specifically marketed to families seeking to elevate their domestic standards. These sets typically included 6 to 8 different products, each containing different stimulant combinations, allowing families to create their own customized cleaning chemistry. The time management aspect was revolutionary for its era. Victorian women using these products could accomplish in 4 or 5 hours what would normally take an entire day of cleaning. But rather than gaining leisure time, most used their chemical efficiency to raise their cleaning standards to impossible levels. Baseboards weren't just cleaned, they were polished to mirror brightness. Windows weren't just washed, They were made so transparent they seemed to disappear. Floors weren't just swept and mopped, they were scrubbed, polished, and buffed until they reflected ceiling fixtures with the crystalline clarity. The industry responded to this escalation by creating increasingly potent formulations. Super-strength domestic solutions appeared in 1892, containing cocaine concentrations that were double the original products. Professional-grade home cleaning systems were marketed to women who wanted to achieve commercial-level results in residential settings. By the mid-1890s, some cleaning products contained cocaine concentrations that would have been dangerous even for experienced medical patients. But Victorian women, convinced that their increased energy and obsessive attention to detail were signs of moral improvement, enthusiastically embraced these increasingly powerful formulations. The physiological effects extended far beyond simple energy increases. Many women developed what we would now recognize as obsessive-compulsive behaviors around cleaning. They would polish the same surface dozens of times, reorganize closets daily, and spend hours arranging household objects with mathematical precision. But Victorian society interpreted these behaviors as evidence of exceptional feminine virtue and domestic skill. The crash cycles were brutal, but rarely understood. After 6-8 hours of chemically fueled cleaning marathons, women would experience what they called virtuous exhaustion, complete physical collapse, depression, and an inability to perform even basic tasks. Rather than recognizing this as drug withdrawal, they attributed these crashes to having worked so hard that they temporarily depleted their feminine energy reserves. The solution, according to both the medical establishment and the cleaning product industry, was more medicine and more products. Women experiencing post-cleaning crashes were encouraged to take restorative tonics, more cocaine, and to maintain their energy with daily cleaning supplements, also more cocaine. This created a feedback loop where the solution to drug-induced problems was more drugs, and the evidence of the product's effectiveness was actually evidence of chemical dependency. The more exhausted women felt after their cleaning marathons, the more convinced they became that they needed better products and stronger formulations. But what happened when these chemically enhanced cleaning sessions moved beyond simple housework and into the social sphere reveals an even more remarkable chapter in this story. Victorian women began hosting what they called cooperative cleaning parties, social gatherings that combined friendship, community service, and mass chemical consumption in ways that would reshape American social culture forever. Get ready to discover how these innocent-seeming domestic gatherings became some of the most drug-fueled social events in American history, and why Victorian tea parties were often more chemically intense than modern music festivals. Let's step into the powder room of Isabella Worthington's Manhattan mansion on an autumn evening in 1889. Isabella sits before her ornate vanity mirror, surrounded by what looks like an apothecary's fever dream. Dozens of crystal bottles, silver jars, and delicate porcelain containers, each promising to unlock the secrets of Victorian beauty perfection. But this isn't just a skincare routine we're witnessing. This is a nightly ritual of chemical transformation that would make a modern cosmetics chemist run screaming from the room. The Victorian beauty standard was as demanding as it was dangerous. Women were expected to achieve an almost supernatural level of physical perfection. Skin so pale it appeared translucent, waists so tiny they defied anatomy, and an ethereal, otherworldly appearance that suggested they lived on moonbeams and moral virtue rather than actual food. Achieving this impossible standard required what the beauty industry euphemistically called cosmetic assistance, products that promised miraculous transformations but delivered something far more sinister. Isabella's evening routine began with Dr. Mackenzie's complexion miracle, a face cream that promised to restore the blooming freshness of youth while invigorating the feminine spirit. The active ingredient? Cocaine hydrochloride at a concentration of nearly 4% combined with lead-based whitening agents and mercury compounds. As she massaged this toxic cocktail into her skin, Isabella felt an immediate tingling sensation that she interpreted as awakening cellular vitality. In reality, she was experiencing the early stages of chemical burns combined with a cocaine high absorbed directly through her facial tissue, but the face cream was just the beginning. Next came Professor Hendrick's eye brightening solution, drops that promised sparkling, vivacious eyes that captivate and enchant. Each drop contained enough cocaine to dilate pupils dramatically while numbing the eye tissues. Victorian women believed that the resulting wide-eyed, startled appearance was the epitome of feminine beauty, not realizing they were walking around in a state of drug-induced ocular paralysis. Have you ever wondered why Victorian portrait photographs show women with such distinctive, almost haunting stares? Those weren't natural expressions. They were the result of systematic chemical manipulation of facial muscles and eye function. The beauty industry had weaponized women's insecurities with precision that would make modern marketing executives weep with admiration. They didn't just sell products, they created entire mythologies around feminine inadequacy. Advertisements in ladies' magazines featured before and after illustrations showing the transformation from common woman to ethereal beauty, with detailed explanations of how each product addressed specific feminine deficiencies. Madame Roland's Skin Perfection System, widely advertised in Harper's Bazaar and Godey's Ladies' Book, promised to address what they called the 7 deadly sins of female appearance: sallow complexion, visible pores, facial hair, age spots, wrinkles, dullness, and worst of all, excessive vitality, meaning any sign that a woman was actually alive and healthy rather than otherworldly and fragile. The system consisted of 7 different products, each containing increasingly dangerous combinations of chemicals. The purifying wash contained sulfuric acid and cocaine. The pore-minimizing tonic featured arsenic compounds and morphine derivatives. The complexion perfector combined lead, mercury, and enough stimulants to keep users awake for days. Women weren't just beautifying themselves, they were engaging in systematic self-poisoning while paying premium prices for the privilege. The economic scale of this beauty industrial complex was staggering. By 1892, American women were spending an estimated $89 million annually on cosmetic products, equivalent to nearly $3 billion in today's economy. But unlike modern cosmetics, these weren't just temporary enhancements. They were creating permanent physical and psychological changes in their users. The application techniques themselves were ritualistic and time-consuming. Victorian beauty manuals recommended that women spend 2 to 3 hours daily on their cosmetic routines, applying products in specific sequences with precise timing intervals. The Countess of Pemberton's Guide to Aristocratic Beauty, published in 1888, included detailed instructions for what it called the Complete Transformation Protocol. This protocol began at 4 a.m. with the application of overnight skin renewal compounds, products containing such high concentrations of active chemicals that they literally burned away the top layers of facial skin while users slept. Women would wake up with faces that were raw, sensitive, and completely dependent on additional products to function normally. The morning routine involved protective base applications, creams designed to create a barrier between the damaged skin and the environment. But these protective creams contained their own cocktails of stimulants and narcotics, ensuring that women remained chemically altered throughout their daily activities. The midday refreshment applications were designed to maintain the chemical effects throughout the day, Victorian ladies carried small silver containers of beauty maintenance powders that they would discreetly apply every few hours. These powders contained concentrated cocaine, allowing women to top off their chemical highs while maintaining the appearance of simple vanity touch-ups. The evening routine was the most intensive, involving the removal of the day's chemical layers and the application of overnight treatments that would continue the cycle of destruction and chemical dependency. Women weren't just maintaining their appearance, they were trapped in daily cycles of self-administered chemical abuse. The physical effects were devastating, but interpreted as signs of beauty success. The characteristic Victorian pale complexion that we admire in historical photographs wasn't natural. It was the result of chronic mercury poisoning, combined with cocaine-induced vasoconstriction. The wide-eyed ethereal expressions weren't genetic, they were symptoms of systematic drug use and chemical burns around the eye area. The psychological effects were equally profound. Women using these products reported feelings of confidence, energy, and euphoria that they attributed to looking more beautiful. They described sensations of inner radiance and spiritual elevation that seemed to confirm the product's effectiveness. What they were actually experiencing were the mood-altering effects of cocaine, morphine, and other psychoactive substances absorbed through their skin. Dr. Sarah McKinney Stewart, one of the first African-American female physicians, documented these effects in her 1890s medical practice in Brooklyn. Her patient records, preserved at the New York Historical Society, describe women who came to her complaining of beauty-related maladies, trembling hands, rapid heartbeat, sleeplessness, and what they called excessive facial sensitivity. Dr. Stewart quickly recognized these as symptoms of chronic poisoning and drug dependency, but when she tried to explain the connection to cosmetic products, her patients often refused to believe her. The beauty industry's marketing had been so effective that women would rather suffer serious health consequences than give up products they believed were essential to their social survival. The social pressure to maintain these chemical beauty routines was immense. Victorian women competed over complexion perfection with the same intensity that modern social media influencers compete over follower counts. But this competition was literally toxic, with women constantly escalating their product use to maintain their advantage in the beauty arms race. Ladies' magazines published detailed reviews of cosmetic products that read more like drug comparisons than beauty advice. The 1891 issue of Peterson's magazine included a feature called Comparative Analysis of Complexion Enhancement Systems that evaluated products based on their immediate transformative power, sustained beautification effects, and spiritual elevation properties, all euphemisms for how high the cocaine content was and how quickly it took effect. The beauty salon industry emerged as sophisticated drug distribution networks disguised as luxury services. High-end establishments like Madame Zelda's Beauty Temple in Manhattan offered complete feminine transformation experiences, day-long sessions where wealthy women would submit to intensive chemical treatments administered by trained professionals. These salons were essentially medical facilities operating without oversight, where women underwent procedures that would be considered dangerous even in modern cosmetic surgery practices. Facial peels using concentrated acids, cocaine injections for lip enhancement, and mercury-based treatments for skin lightening were standard services offered alongside tea and conversation. The international scope of this beauty chemical complex was remarkable. American women were using products imported from Paris, London, and Vienna, each claiming regional beauty secrets while containing essentially the same dangerous chemical combinations. The global trade in beauty chemicals created supply chains that connected Victorian ladies' vanities tables to coca plantations in South America, opium fields in Asia, and mercury mines in Europe. But perhaps most tragically, these beauty standards and the chemical means to achieve them were being passed down through generations. Mothers taught daughters to begin using these products as soon as they showed signs of physical maturity, creating multi-generational cycles of chemical dependency disguised as feminine education. The documentation of these generational patterns reveals one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the Victorian beauty industry, the way it systematically indoctrinated young women into believing that their natural appearance was inadequate, and that chemical enhancement was not just desirable but morally necessary for proper feminine development. As we delve deeper into this world of chemical beauty standards, we're about to discover how these individual transformations connected to create a society-wide crisis that would ultimately challenge the very foundations of Victorian medical practice. The story of how doctors and the women they treated became locked in a cycle of chemical dependency that neither understood is both tragic and remarkably relevant to our modern struggles with prescription drug culture. Next, we'll explore the examining rooms and consultation chambers where Victorian physicians, armed with good intentions but dangerous ignorance, prescribed treatments that would turn routine medical visits into gateways to chemical dependency that destroyed lives while promising to heal them. Settled into the burgundy leather chair of Dr. Cornelius Whitman's prestigious Beacon Hill office, Mrs. Catherine Pemberton smooths her silk gloves and prepares to describe what she believes are symptoms of moral weakness. It's March 1888, and Catherine is experiencing what we would now recognise as clinical depression following the death of her infant son. But Dr. Whitman, Harvard-educated and considered one of Boston's most progressive physicians, is about to prescribe a treatment that will transform Catherine's grief into something far more dangerous than sadness could ever be. The Victorian medical establishment had created an entire classification system for women's emotional and physical experiences that was both scientifically ignorant and devastatingly effective at turning normal human responses into profitable medical conditions. What they called hysteria encompassed everything from grief and anxiety to simple fatigue or independent thinking. The prescribed treatments read like a drug dealer's inventory disguised as medical wisdom. Dr. Whitman opens his leather-bound prescription pad and writes with the confidence of someone who genuinely believes he's practicing cutting-edge medicine. For your melancholic constitution and nervous exhaustion, he explains to Catherine, I'm prescribing Dr. Hammond's Nerve and Brain Tonic, 3 tablespoons daily with meals. Additionally, you'll take Professor Barthelow's Female Restorative, 2 teaspoons every 4 hours for emotional regulation. What Catherine doesn't know is that Dr. Hammond's Nerve and Brain Tonic contains 12% cocaine by volume, while Professor Barthelow's Female Restorative combines cocaine with chloral hydrate, a combination that would make modern emergency physicians declare a medical crisis. But in De Whitman's world, this isn't drug dealing. This is therapeutic intervention based on the latest scientific understanding of female psychology. The medical literature of the 1880s reveals the breathtaking scope of conditions that physicians treated with cocaine-based medications. The American Journal of Medicine published articles with titles like The Therapeutic Application of Cocaine in Nervous Disorders of the Female Constitution and Coca Preparations in the Treatment of Hysteroneurotic Manifestations. These weren't fringe publications. They were mainstream medical journals read by thousands of practicing physicians across the country. Dr. William Alexander Hammond, former Surgeon General of the United States, wrote extensively about what he called the cocaine solution to female emotional irregularities. His 1887 paper in the New York Medical Journal stated, "The female nervous system, being more delicate and susceptible than the male, requires more vigorous intervention to restore proper emotional balance. Cocaine properly administered can transform a weeping, irrational woman into a model of feminine composure and domestic efficiency. Think about the terrifying logic here. The medical establishment was essentially arguing that women's natural emotional responses were pathological conditions requiring chemical correction. Grief over loss, anxiety about social expectations, fatigue from managing households without modern conveniences. All of these were reframed as medical disorders requiring pharmaceutical intervention. The prescription patterns reveal the systematic nature of this chemical approach to women's healthcare. A typical nervously exhausted Victorian woman might receive prescriptions for morning stimulants, afternoon mood stabilizers, evening relaxation compounds, and emergency doses for acute emotional episodes. Each of these contain different combinations of cocaine, morphine, alcohol, and chloral hydrate. Catherine's treatment protocol, preserved in Dr. Whitman's patient records at the Massachusetts Historical Society, shows the escalating nature of Victorian psychiatric medication. Week 1, standard doses of 2 different cocaine-based tonics. Week 3, increased dosages plus the addition of morphine-based nerve pills for nighttime anxiety. Week 6, the original medications plus emergency relief powders, containing pure cocaine for what Dr. Whitman termed breakthrough melancholic episodes. By week 8, Catherine was consuming enough controlled substances daily to incapacitate a modern adult, but she was reporting to Dr. Whitman that she felt wonderfully restored and filled with feminine vitality. Her diary entries from this period, donated to the Schlesinger Library by her descendants, read like testimonials from someone experiencing a chemical high. I wake each morning with such energy and clarity. The world seems brighter, my duties lighter, my very soul elevated to realms of profound understanding. What Catherine was actually experiencing was chronic cocaine and morphine intoxication, but both she and Dr. Whitman interpreted her chemical euphoria as evidence of successful medical treatment. The cycle of addiction was being established and reinforced by professional medical authority. The economic relationship between physicians and pharmaceutical companies was openly collaborative in ways that would trigger massive scandals today. Drug companies regularly sent free samples to doctors, sponsored medical conferences, and even paid physicians to write testimonial letters about their product's effectiveness. Dr. Whitman's personal correspondence, preserved in his estate papers, includes dozens of letters from pharmaceutical representatives offering financial incentives for prescribing specific cocaine-based medications to female patients. One particularly revealing letter from the Park Davis Company, dated September 1888, offers Dr. Whitman a $500 annual consulting fee equivalent to nearly $17,000 today, in exchange for prescribing their female nervous system correction kit to at least 50 patients per year. The kit contained 6 different cocaine-based medications designed to be used in sequence throughout a woman's monthly cycle. But the most disturbing aspect of this medical pharmaceutical complex was how it created self-perpetuating cycles of chemical dependency while presenting itself as moral health care. Women who experienced withdrawal symptoms when they missed doses were told they were suffering from recurring nervous weakness that required increased medication. Those who developed tolerance and needed higher doses were diagnosed with progressive female nervous disorders, requiring more intensive pharmaceutical intervention. The diagnostic categories themselves were masterpieces of circular logic designed to trap women in chemical dependency while making them grateful for their imprisonment. Chronic feminine melancholy required long-term stimulant therapy. Recurring emotional instability needed continuous mood-altering medication. Domestic nervous exhaustion demanded energy-enhancing pharmaceutical support. Dr. Mary Putnam Jacobi, one of the few female physicians of the era and a graduate of the Paris School of Medicine, began documenting the patterns she observed in her New York practice. Her 1891 paper, Observations on the Physical and Mental Effects of Patent Medicines on Female Patients, was one of the first medical publications to question the widespread use of cocaine-based treatments for women. Dr. Jacobi wrote, "I have observed in my female patients a concerning pattern of symptoms that appear to correlate with their use of popular nerve tonics and emotional regulation medications. These include rapid pulse, dilated pupils, excessive energy followed by periods of exhaustion, and what patients describe as intense craving for their medications. Most troubling, patients who attempt to discontinue these treatments experience severe physical and emotional distress that physicians then interpret as evidence that the medications are necessary." Her observations were largely dismissed by her male colleagues who attributed her concerns to female emotional volatility and suggested she might benefit from nerve tonic treatment herself. The medical establishment's response to Dr. Jacobi's warnings reveals how deeply invested they were in maintaining the pharmaceutical approach to women's healthcare. The training of physicians during this era included virtually no education about drug dependency or the physiological effects of long-term stimulant use. Medical schools taught that cocaine was a safe, effective treatment for various conditions, with no mention of addiction potential or withdrawal symptoms. Young doctors entered practice genuinely believing they were helping their female patients while actually creating chemical dependency on an industrial scale. The patient case files from major urban medical practices of the 1880s and 1890s read like documentation of a massive uncontrolled drug experiment. Women were prescribed cocaine-based medications for conditions ranging from headaches and menstrual cramps to grief, anxiety, and what physicians called excessive intellectual activity, meaning women who read too much or expressed opinions too freely. The social class dynamics of this medical drug distribution system were particularly insidious. Wealthy women received more expensive, higher-quality cocaine preparations prescribed by prestigious physicians in elegant offices. Middle-class women got standard pharmaceutical cocaine from neighborhood doctors. Poor women were often denied access to these medications entirely, ironically protecting them from chemical dependency while excluding them from what society considered proper medical care. The geographic spread of cocaine-based medical practice followed the same patterns as other Victorian cultural phenomena, starting in major eastern cities and spreading westward along railroad lines and communication networks. By 1890, physicians in small towns across America were prescribing cocaine-based treatments for female patients, having learned these techniques through medical journals and professional conferences dominated by East Coast pharmaceutical interests. The documentation from rural medical practices shows how thoroughly this approach had penetrated American healthcare. Dr. Samuel Morrison's practice records from a small Iowa farming community show that by 1892, nearly 40% of his female patients were receiving some form of cocaine-based medication, often for conditions that would be considered normal responses to the physical and emotional challenges of frontier life. But perhaps most tragic were the cases where legitimate medical conditions were masked or worsened by cocaine treatment. Women suffering from thyroid disorders, early diabetes, or other serious medical conditions received cocaine for their symptoms, temporarily feeling better due to the drug's stimulant effects, while their underlying conditions progressed untreated. The correspondence between physicians and pharmaceutical companies during this period reveals the extent to which medical practice had become intertwined with chemical sales. Doctors were encouraged to view women's emotional and physical complaints through a pharmaceutical lens. Every symptom represented an opportunity for chemical intervention. Every patient was a potential long-term medication consumer. As this medical pharmaceutical complex grew more sophisticated and profitable, it began to attract attention from an unexpected source: the very women it was supposedly helping. Some patients began to notice connections between their medications and their symptoms that their physicians had missed or ignored entirely. But the women who started questioning this system faced a medical establishment that had enormous professional, financial, and cultural investment in maintaining cocaine-based treatment protocols. Their journeys from grateful patients to medical reformers would require courage that went far beyond anything Victorian society expected from properly medicated ladies. In our next segment, we'll enter the nurseries and playrooms where this chemical medical culture was creating its youngest victims. Children whose introduction to life included daily doses of substances that would fundamentally alter their development, while their parents celebrated the miracles of modern pediatric medicine. Through the gleaming mahogany doors of Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt's Fifth Avenue mansion, we glimpse a scene that would redefine everything you thought you knew about Victorian high society. The date is October 15th, 1889, and New York's most distinguished ladies have gathered for what appears to be an elegant afternoon tea party. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silk gowns, servants glide between guests with silver trays, and the conversation sparkles with wit and refinement. But look closer at those delicate teacups, those ornate serving dishes, those charming little bottles the ladies pass discreetly among themselves. This isn't just a social gathering, this is one of the most drug-intensive events in American social history, disguised as the height of Victorian respectability. The transformation of elite Victorian social gatherings into sophisticated drug distribution networks happened so gradually and elegantly that even the participants remained largely unaware of what they were creating. These weren't wild parties or underground gatherings. They were the most respectable social events of their era, hosted by women whose names appeared regularly in society pages and whose moral reputations were beyond question. Mrs. William Backhouse Astor Jr., the undisputed queen of New York society, pioneered what she called therapeutic entertaining, social events where the refreshments were carefully curated to enhance the guests' enjoyment while addressing their various health concerns. Her famous Monday receptions featured what she termed medicinal refreshments: teas infused with cocaine for nervous ladies, cordials containing morphine for those suffering from social fatigue, and delicate pastries enhanced with the various pharmaceutical preparations. The guest lists for these events read like a who's who of American elite society, but they also functioned as sophisticated customer databases for pharmaceutical consumption. Mrs. Astor kept detailed records of her guests' preferences for different therapeutic refreshments, essentially tracking their drug consumption patterns while maintaining the facade of gracious hospitality. Think about the social genius of this system. Imagine being able to consume controlled substances in the most socially acceptable setting possible, surrounded by the most respectable people in society, with consumption encouraged and facilitated by women whose moral authority was unquestionable. It was the perfect cover for what was essentially organized drug use among America's social elite. The menu planning for these events was surprisingly sophisticated. The Delmonico's catering records, preserved in the New York Historical Society archives, show detailed specifications for ladies' social refreshments that read more like pharmaceutical formulations than party planning. Afternoon stimulation service included cocaine-infused tea cakes, morphine-laced pétas four, and what they called conversation-enhancing cordials, containing various combinations of psychoactive substances. The social protocols that developed around these chemically enhanced gatherings were elaborate and specific. Ladies would arrive at 2 p.m. for what was called preparatory refreshment, essentially a pre-party dose of stimulants to ensure proper energy levels. The main event from 3:05 p.m. featured social sustenance service with carefully timed distribution of different pharmaceutical refreshments designed to maintain optimal chemical states throughout the gathering. The final phase, departure preparation, involved restorative tonics designed to help guests transition back to their normal domestic responsibilities. But perhaps most remarkably, these events served as informal pharmaceutical consultation sessions. Women would discuss their various health concerns and share recommendations for specific products and dosages. The conversation at these gatherings, recorded in several participants' diaries, reveals detailed discussions of drug effects, tolerance levels, and combination strategies that would sound familiar to anyone who's witnessed modern prescription drug culture. Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish, another prominent New York hostess, elevated these pharmaceutical social gatherings to new levels of sophistication with her Wellness Wednesdays, weekly events where she invited medical experts to educate her guests about the latest therapeutic products while providing generous sampling opportunities. These weren't medical consultations. They were essentially drug sales presentations disguised as educational social events. The financial scale of these elite pharmaceutical social gatherings was staggering. Mrs. Astor's household accounts show that she spent more on medicinal refreshments for her social events than most middle-class families spent on food for an entire year. A single afternoon reception might involve $200 worth of pharmaceutical preparations, equivalent to nearly $7,000 in today's money, distributed as party favors and refreshments. The geographic spread of this high society pharmaceutical culture followed the social networks of America's elite families. What started in New York's Fifth Avenue mansions quickly spread to Boston's Beacon Hill, Philadelphia's Main Line, and the grand estates of Newport. By 1890, elite social events from coast to coast featured similar pharmaceutical refreshment services. The servants who worked these events became inadvertent witnesses to the transformation of their employers and guests. The Diary of Mary O'Brien, an Irish immigrant who worked as a parlourmaid for several prominent families, provides a fascinating perspective on what she called the ladies' strange parties. She wrote, "They arrive looking tired and proper, but after an hour of tea and sweets, they become quite different, louder, more animated, talking rapidly about things that seem to excite them greatly. By the end, some are nearly vibrating with energy, others seem dreamy and distant." What Mary was observing were the predictable effects of cocaine, morphine, and other drugs being consumed in social settings by women who had no understanding of what they were actually ingesting. From the servants' perspective, these gatherings looked like transformation rituals where proper Victorian ladies temporarily became different people entirely. The children of these elite families were often present at the beginning or end of these events, and their observations, recorded in letters and diaries, provide additional insight into how these pharmaceutical social gatherings appeared to young observers. 13-year-old Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, Mrs. Astor's daughter, wrote in her diary, "Mother's Monday ladies start quiet and end loud. They laugh at everything and seem to find the wallpaper fascinating. Some dance to music that isn't playing." The social networking that occurred at these chemically enhanced gatherings had real economic and political consequences. Business deals were negotiated, charitable organizations were founded, and social movements were launched by groups of women under the influence of various pharmaceutical preparations. The minutes of the New York Women's Hospital Association, founded at one of Mrs. Fish's Wellness Wednesdays, revealed decision-making processes that were clearly influenced by the participants' altered mental states. The cultural impact extended beyond individual gatherings to influence broader Victorian social customs. The practice of afternoon calling, the formal social visits that structured elite women's daily schedules, became increasingly structured around pharmaceutical refreshment exchanges. Women would visit friends specifically to share new products, compare effects, and coordinate their consumption schedules. The fashion industry responded to these pharmaceutical social gatherings with specially designed accessories. Delicate silver pill boxes became essential elements of formal attire. Tiny crystal bottles for liquid medications were incorporated into evening purses. Some jewelry pieces included hidden compartments for carrying emergency doses of various preparations. The wealthy weren't just consuming drugs socially, they were turning drug consumption into fashion statements. The international dimension of these elite pharmaceutical gatherings was remarkable. American society hostesses maintained correspondence with European counterparts, sharing information about regional pharmaceutical specialties and importing exotic preparations for their guests. Mrs. Astor's 1891 International Wellness Exposition featured pharmaceutical products from France, Germany, Austria, and England, essentially creating a high society international drug sampling event. The documentation of these events in society pages and women's magazines required careful euphemistic language that concealed their true nature while celebrating their social importance. Harper's Bazaar regularly featured articles about innovative entertaining approaches and therapeutic social gatherings without ever directly acknowledging the pharmaceutical nature of these events. But the most significant long-term impact was how these elite pharmaceutical social gatherings normalized and legitimized drug consumption among America's most influential women. When society's moral arbiters were hosting and attending drug distribution events disguised as tea parties, it created cultural permission for pharmaceutical approaches to social and personal challenges throughout all the levels of American society. The influence of these women extended far beyond their immediate social circles. They served on charitable boards, influenced political movements, and shaped cultural trends. Their embrace of pharmaceutical solutions to life's challenges helped create the cultural foundation for America's modern relationship with prescription drugs and chemical wellness approaches. As these elite pharmaceutical social networks grew more sophisticated and influential, they began to intersect with other aspects of Victorian women's lives in ways that would have profound consequences for American society. The story of how these chemically enhanced social gatherings influenced the workplace experiences of Victorian women reveals another dimension of this pharmaceutical transformation of American culture. Our exploration continues into the factories, shops, and offices where Victorian working women discovered that the chemical solutions being celebrated in elite social circles had very different meanings when applied to the harsh realities of industrial labour and economic survival. The factory bell clangs at 5:30 a.m. and 22-year-old Rose Murphy stumbles through the gates of the Lawrence textile mill in Massachusetts, clutching a small brown bottle that she believes contains her salvation. It's January 1892, and Rose faces another 14-hour shift in conditions that would horrify modern labour inspectors. Deafening machinery, suffocating air thick with cotton fibres, and supervisors who view workers as barely more valuable than the thread they produce. But Rose has discovered something that transforms this industrial nightmare into what she describes as bearable, almost pleasant work. That something is Dr. Pierce's golden medical discovery, a cocaine-laced tonic that promises to energize the working woman and sustain her through life's most demanding labours. The intersection of Victorian pharmaceutical culture with industrial working conditions created one of the most exploitative chapters in American labour history, a time when employers discovered they could use women's chemical dependency to extract unprecedented levels of productivity, while workers believed they were simply taking medicine to help them cope with their jobs. Rose's morning routine before her shift reveals the systematic nature of this workplace pharmaceutical culture. At 5 a.m. she takes 2 tablespoons of her energy tonic. At 5:15 she applies what she calls her work cream, a cocaine-infused lotion that promises to strengthen the hands and focus the mind for detailed labour. By 5:25, as she approaches the factory gates, Rose feels energised, alert, and ready to operate dangerous machinery for the next 14 hours without break. But Rose isn't unique. Factory records from the Lawrence Mills, preserved in the American Textile History Museum, show that by 1893, nearly 60% of female workers were purchasing some form of workplace stimulant from the company store. The mill owners hadn't banned these substances. They'd embraced them as tools for maintaining productivity levels that would have been impossible without chemical assistance. The economics of this workplace pharmaceutical system were brutally simple. Female textile workers earned an average of $6 per week, but they were spending $50 of that on various stimulant preparations needed to maintain the pace of work required by their employers. The mill owners, recognizing a profitable opportunity, established on-site company stores that sold pharmaceutical products specifically marketed to industrial workers. Think about the perverse logic here. Women were essentially paying their employers for the privilege of chemically altering themselves to tolerate intolerable working conditions. The more dangerous and demanding the work became, the more pharmaceutical products the women needed to purchase to survive their shifts. The product marketing for workplace stimulants was specifically designed to exploit the desperation of working women. Dr. Hartman's Peruna advertised itself as the working woman's friend, providing energy and endurance for those who must labour to survive. Mrs. Pinkham's vegetable compound promised to strengthen the feminine constitution for the demands of industrial life. These weren't general health products, they were specifically formulated and marketed as workplace survival tools. The dosage recommendations for industrial workers were significantly higher than those suggested for middle-class women using the same products for nervous conditions. The working woman's version of popular tonics contained 2 to 3 times the cocaine concentration of the versions sold to wealthy ladies for their parlour room ailments. The pharmaceutical industry had essentially created different drug formulations based on social class and workplace demands. Mill supervisors quickly learned to recognize the signs of workers who weren't adequately medicated. Women showing normal fatigue, reasonable caution around dangerous machinery, or reluctance to maintain inhuman production speeds were labeled lazy or unsuitable for industrial work. The solution wasn't better working conditions, it was a stronger medication. Sarah Bagley, a mill worker who later became a labour organiser, documented this pharmaceutical workplace culture in her letters to the Lowell Offering, a magazine written by and for factory women. In 1894 she wrote, "The girls here are not themselves. They arrive pale and tired, take their morning medicine, and transform into something almost mechanical in their energy and focus. By afternoon, when the effects wear off, many can barely stand, but they take their second dose and continue until the evening bell." What Sarah was describing was a workplace culture of mandatory chemical dependency, where women's natural physical limitations were overcome through pharmaceutical intervention rather than humane working conditions. The mill owners had discovered that cocaine-enhanced workers could maintain production levels that were literally impossible for unmedicated human beings. The health consequences were devastating but carefully concealed by both employers and the pharmaceutical industry. Company medical records, when they existed at all, attributed workplace injuries and health problems to natural feminine weakness, or insufficient constitutional strength for industrial labour, rather than recognising the role of chemical exhaustion and drug-induced impaired judgment. The variety of workplace stimulants available to industrial workers was remarkable. Morning preparations promised sustained energy for demanding labour. Midday tonics offered renewed strength without interrupting productivity. Evening compounds advertised recovery assistance for the industrious woman. Each product contained different combinations of cocaine, caffeine, alcohol, and other stimulants designed to address different phases of the industrial workday. The most successful workplace pharmaceutical products were those that combined stimulant effects with pain relief. Dr. King's new discovery for women promised to eliminate fatigue while numbing the discomfort of repetitive labour. This dual-action approach allowed women to work through injuries, ignore warning signs of physical exhaustion, and maintain dangerous production levels while feeling artificially energized and pain-free. The social dynamics within factories created peer pressure for pharmaceutical use that reinforced the system. Women who could maintain high production levels while appearing energetic and focused became informal leaders and received better treatment from supervisors. Those who struggled to keep up without chemical assistance were marginalized and often fired for inadequate performance. Factory boarding houses, where many mill workers lived, became informal pharmaceutical distribution centers. Older workers would mentor newcomers not just in job skills, but in pharmaceutical strategies for surviving industrial work. Room sharing often involved sharing medications, creating communal drug dependency that strengthened social bonds while deepening chemical reliance. The geographic spread of this industrial pharmaceutical culture followed the expansion of American manufacturing. From the textile mills of New England to the garment factories of New York, from the food processing plants of Chicago to the tobacco factories of the South, wherever women worked in industrial settings, pharmaceutical companies established targeted marketing campaigns for workplace stimulants. The advertising for these products appeared in publications specifically distributed to working women. The Factory Girl's Friend and Industrial Woman's Weekly featured advertisements that spoke directly to the experiences of female industrial workers. Tired after your long shift? Dr. Morton's Working Woman's Tonic will restore your energy for evening responsibilities. Struggling to maintain production quotas? Professor Williams' industrial strength formula provides the extra capability you need. But perhaps most insidiously, some employers began requiring pharmaceutical use as a condition of employment. The Consolidated Textile Company in Rhode Island included in their 1895 employee handbook a section titled Maintaining Adequate Energy Levels that strongly recommended specific pharmaceutical products and dosing schedules for different types of work. While technically not mandatory, workers understood that failure to maintain chemically enhanced productivity levels would result in termination. The intersection of this workplace pharmaceutical culture with worker safety created a perfect storm of industrial accidents. Women operating dangerous machinery while under the influence of stimulants that impaired judgment and reaction times were injured at rates that shocked even Victorian-era factory inspectors. But rather than addressing the underlying pharmaceutical culture, factory owners installed more safety equipment and hired additional supervisors to monitor workers more closely. The economic exploitation extended beyond simple wage theft. Workers were not only underpaid for dangerous labour, but they were also required to purchase the chemical means to survive that labour from their employers. The mill stores sold pharmaceutical products at significant markups, creating additional profit streams from worker desperation while ensuring that paychecks were immediately recirculated back to company coffers. The long-term health consequences for these working women were severe, but rarely documented in ways that connected them to pharmaceutical use. Mill fever, factory fatigue, and industrial hysteria were recognized medical conditions, but their relationship to chronic stimulant use went unrecognized by medical professionals who were themselves prescribing similar substances to their middle-class patients. As this industrial pharmaceutical culture matured and spread throughout American manufacturing, it began to intersect with broader social movements in ways that would have profound consequences for American society. The story of how chemically dependent working women navigated the complex world of Victorian romance and marriage reveals yet another dimension of how pharmaceutical culture was reshaping the most intimate aspects of American life. The courtship rituals, marriage negotiations, and domestic arrangements that emerged when chemically altered women attempted to form relationships with equally altered partners created social dynamics that would challenge every assumption about Victorian family life and romantic love. Underneath the crystal chandelier of the Grand Ballroom at Chicago's Palmer House Hotel, something extraordinary and terrifying is unfolding on this December evening in 1893. Miss Charlotte Whitmore adjusts her pearl necklace with trembling fingers, not from nervousness about meeting her suitor, but from the effects of Dr. Hammond's pre-social confidence tonic she consumed an hour earlier. Across the room, Mr. Theodore Ashford straightens his white bow tie while discreetly checking his pocket watch, calculating when he should take his next dose of Professor Williams's Gentleman's Social Vigour supplement. What's about to transpire isn't just Victorian courtship. It's a chemically orchestrated dance between two people whose personalities, emotions, and decision-making abilities have been fundamentally altered by pharmaceutical substances they don't understand. The transformation of Victorian romance and marriage by widespread pharmaceutical use created social dynamics that would make modern relationship therapists question everything they thought they knew about authentic human connection. When both partners in courtship were operating under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances, the very foundations of romantic compatibility, emotional intimacy, and marital consent became chemically complicated in ways that Victorian society never recognized. Charlotte's preparation for this evening began 3 days earlier, with what her mother called romantic readiness protocols. Mrs. Whitmore, following advice from Harper's Bazaar's Guide to Proper Courtship Preparation, had Charlotte begin a regimen of Dr. Pierce's favourite prescription for enhancing feminine charm and emotional availability. The medication, containing significant amounts of cocaine and alcohol, was designed to make women more socially engaging, emotionally expressive, and what the advertisements tactfully called romantically receptive. But Charlotte's pharmaceutical preparation extended far beyond simple mood enhancement. Her evening routine included de Mackenzie's complexion beautifier, cocaine-based face cream, Professor Hendrick's eye brightening solution, cocaine drops for dilated pupils, and Madame Roland's confidence cologne, an alcohol and stimulant mixture applied to pulse points. By the time she arrived at the Palmer house, Charlotte wasn't just dressed for romance, she was chemically optimized for it. Theodore's preparation was equally sophisticated but followed masculine pharmaceutical protocols. His morning began with Dr. Kilmer's male vitality tonic designed to enhance masculine confidence and social dominance. His pre-social routine included Professor Barthelow's Gentleman's Nerve Steadier, cocaine and brandy, and what his pharmacist discreetly called social performance insurance, various stimulant preparations designed to ensure peak physical and mental performance during courtship activities. Have you ever wondered why Victorian courtship rituals were so formal and structured? Part of the reason was that both participants were often under the influence of substances that impaired judgment while increasing confidence, a dangerous combination that required strict social protocols to prevent scandalous behavior. The pharmaceutical industry had recognized romantic anxiety as a massive market opportunity and developed entire product lines specifically for courtship enhancement. Advertisements in ladies' magazines promised that the right combination of medications could transform any woman into the belle of every ball, while men's publications advertised products that would ensure masculine dominance in all social situations. The courtship correspondence between Charlotte and Theodore, preserved in the Chicago History Museum, reveals the extent to which their relationship developed under pharmaceutical influence. Theodore's letters describe Charlotte as uncommonly vivacious and delightfully animated, while Charlotte writes about Theodore's extraordinary energy and fascinating conversational abilities. What they were actually describing were the effects of cocaine and other stimulants, but they interpreted these chemically induced traits as evidence of exceptional romantic compatibility. The engagement period became an elaborate pharmaceutical coordination process. Victorian etiquette books began including sections on maintaining proper energy levels during the extended courtship activities. Young couples were advised to coordinate their medication schedules to ensure optimal compatibility during social events, family visits, and private conversations. The economic aspect of pharmaceutical courtship was significant. A proper Victorian gentleman was expected to provide his fiancée with wellness support during their engagement, essentially paying for her ongoing medication costs as a demonstration of his ability to provide for her needs. Theodore's financial records show that he spent £47 monthly on Charlotte's various tonics and treatments, equivalent to nearly £100 in today's money. But the most troubling aspect of this chemically mediated courtship culture was how it affected the fundamental question of romantic consent. When both partners were operating under the influence of mood-altering substances that increased confidence while decreasing judgment, were they truly capable of making informed decisions about marriage and intimacy? The wedding industry adapted to accommodate couples whose relationships had developed under pharmaceutical influence. Wedding planning guides included detailed sections on maintaining romantic energy throughout extended celebration periods. Reception menus featured celebration tonics designed to sustain the chemical states that had characterized the couple's courtship. Some wedding invitations even included discreet notations about the availability of refreshment assistance for guests who might need pharmaceutical support to enjoy the festivities appropriately. The marriage ceremony itself often involved pharmaceutical preparation rituals that went unrecognized by clergy and family members. Brides would take wedding day confidence tonics to manage anxiety and ensure appropriate emotional expression. Grooms consumed ceremony steadiness preparations to maintain composure during the formal proceedings. The couple exchanging vows were often chemically altered in ways that affected their mental state during one of the most important legal and emotional commitments of their lives. The honeymoon period created unique challenges for couples whose courtship had been sustained by pharmaceutical enhancement. Travel disrupted medication schedules. Unfamiliar environments made it difficult to maintain consistent dosing, and the stress of intimate cohabitation often revealed personality differences that had been masked by chemical alterations during courtship. The correspondence from newlywed couples during this era frequently describes what they called adjustment difficulties that we would now recognize as the challenges of maintaining a relationship when both partners were experiencing changes in their pharmaceutical regimens. Theodore wrote to his brother 3 weeks after his honeymoon. "Charlotte seems quite different from the woman I courted. She is often tired, sometimes melancholy, and lacks the vivacious energy that so captivated me during our engagement." What Theodore was observing were the effects of Charlotte's disrupted medication schedule and possible withdrawal symptoms, but neither he nor she understood the connection between her changed demeanor and her pharmaceutical routine. Instead, they attributed these changes to the natural adjustments of married life and sought medical advice for what they perceived as Charlotte's declining health. The medical establishment's response to these marital adjustment disorders was predictably pharmaceutical. Doctors prescribed stronger medications, different combinations of drugs, and more frequent dosing schedules to help couples maintain the chemical states that had characterized their successful courtships. Rather than recognizing that relationships built on pharmaceutical foundations might be inherently unstable, physicians doubled down on chemical solutions to chemical problems. The domestic arrangements that emerged from these pharmaceutical marriages were unlike anything in previous human history. Couples coordinated their daily medication schedules to maintain compatibility. Household budgets included substantial line items for health maintenance, the ongoing pharmaceutical costs required to sustain their relationship. Evening routines involved mutual administration of various tonics and treatments, turning marriage into a kind of medical partnership. The children born to these pharmaceutical marriages grew up in households where chemical mood management was the norm. They learned to recognize their parents' medication schedules, understood that family harmony depended on proper pharmaceutical maintenance, and absorbed lessons about using chemicals to manage emotional and social challenges. These children were being raised by parents whose personalities and emotional responses were chemically mediated, creating generational impacts that would shape American family culture for decades. The social expectations around pharmaceutical marriage maintenance were enormous. Victorian wives were expected to manage not only their own medication regimens, but also to monitor and support their husband's pharmaceutical needs. Marriage advice columns regularly featured tips on helping your husband maintain his masculine vitality through proper therapeutic support, and ensuring domestic harmony through coordinated wellness routines. The correspondence between married women during this era reveals informal networks of pharmaceutical marriage advice. Women shared information about medication combinations that enhanced marital harmony, dosing strategies for managing domestic conflicts, and product recommendations for maintaining romantic interest over time. These weren't discussions about improving communication or emotional intimacy. They were essentially drug-sharing networks for married couples. The economic burden of maintaining pharmaceutical marriages was substantial. Middle-class families were spending 15 to 20% of their household income on various medications and treatments required to sustain the chemical states that had brought them together. Working-class couples who couldn't afford consistent pharmaceutical support often experienced what they called marriage difficulties that were actually withdrawal-related relationship problems. The divorce patterns of the era reveal interesting correlations with pharmaceutical access and usage. Couples who maintained consistent access to the medications that had sustained their courtship had lower divorce rates, but higher rates of what medical records describe as domestic nervous disorders, essentially the health consequences of long-term drug dependency. Couples who lost access to their medications due to financial constraints often experienced rapid relationship deterioration that was attributed to incompatible temperaments rather than chemical dependency. The legal implications were significant but rarely recognized. Marriage contracts were being entered into by parties whose judgment was impaired by substances they didn't understand. Domestic violence cases often involved partners whose behavior was altered by pharmaceutical preparations, but the legal system had no framework for understanding how chemical influences affected personal responsibility and criminal behavior. As these pharmaceutical marriages matured and their consequences became more apparent, some members of Victorian society began to recognize patterns that the medical establishment was ignoring or misinterpreting. The story of how some Victorian families began to connect their relationship difficulties to their chemical consumption reveals both the power of pharmaceutical marketing and the resilience of human wisdom when confronted with obvious contradictions. But before we explore that awakening, we need to understand how this chemical approach to human relationships intersected with one of the most powerful institutions in Victorian society, the medical profession itself. The story of how doctors became both the promoters and the victims of the pharmaceutical culture they had helped create reveals the tragic irony at the heart of Victorian drug culture. Coming up, we'll step inside the consulting rooms and private lives of the physicians who had become the primary distributors of chemical dependency while struggling with their own relationships to the substances they prescribed with such confidence. Behind the heavy oak door of Dr. Harrison Blackwell's private study in Philadelphia, a scene unfolds that would shatter every assumption about Victorian medical authority. It's 3 a.m. on a cold February night in 1844, and one of the city's most respected physicians sits hunched over his mahogany desk, his hands trembling as he measures out his 4th dose of cocaine solution since midnight. Dr. Blackwell isn't treating a patient. He's desperately trying to steady his nerves enough to write tomorrow's prescriptions, the same cocaine-based medications that have turned him into a shadow of the confident healer he once was. This is the ultimate irony of Victorian pharmaceutical culture. The very doctors who created the addiction crisis had become its most tragic victims. The medical profession's relationship with cocaine and other pharmaceutical preparations created a feedback loop of dependency that was both professionally sanctioned and personally devastating. Physicians who spent their days prescribing stimulants, sedatives, and mood-altering substances to patients were operating in an environment where chemical solutions to life's challenges weren't just accepted, they were considered scientifically advanced medicine. Dr. Blackwell's descent into pharmaceutical dependency began innocently enough, following patterns that were common among his colleagues. The demanding schedule of a Victorian physician, house calls at all hours, complex surgical procedures without modern anesthesia, and the emotional burden of treating patients with limited medical options created stress levels that the era's pharmaceutical solution seemed perfectly designed to address. His morning routine had gradually evolved from simple coffee and breakfast to what he called his professional preparation protocol. At 6 a.m., de Blackwell would take what he termed a diagnostic clarity enhancer, cocaine dissolved in wine, to sharpen mental acuity for complex medical decision-making. At 7 a.m., he would apply what he called steady hand solution, a cocaine-based lotion rubbed into his palms and fingers to ensure surgical precision during delicate procedures. The American Medical Association's own publications during this era reveal the extent to which pharmaceutical self-medication had become normalized within the medical profession. The Journal of the American Medical Association regularly featured articles with titles like Maintaining Professional Excellence Through Therapeutic Self-Care and The Physician's Duty to Optimize Personal Performance Through Scientific Medicine. Dr. William Halsted, one of the founding fathers of modern surgery and the first chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, became so dependent on cocaine that he eventually switched to morphine in an attempt to manage his addiction. His case, documented in medical archives, shows how even the most brilliant medical minds of the era could be destroyed by the substances they prescribed to others with complete confidence. Think about the terrifying implications here. The doctors who were determining appropriate dosages, diagnosing conditions, and making life-or-death medical decisions were themselves operating under the influence of the same substances they were prescribing to their patients. The blind were quite literally leading the blind, and both groups were walking toward a cliff. The medical culture of the era actively encouraged pharmaceutical experimentation among physicians. Medical schools taught that doctors should personally test new medications to better understand their effects on patients. This professional duty to experience drugs firsthand created a generation of physicians who became inadvertent test subjects for the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Blackwell's personal medical journals, preserved in the College of Physicians of Philadelphia archives, document his gradual realization that his therapeutic self-care had become something much more dangerous. His entries from early 1893 describe using cocaine solutions for enhanced diagnostic intuition and sustained surgical stamina. By late 1893, his entries reveal a man who was consuming cocaine multiple times daily and had begun experiencing what he euphemistically called professional performance irregularities. The peer pressure within medical circles to maintain chemically enhanced performance levels was intense. Physicians who could work longer hours, perform more complex procedures, and maintain higher energy levels gained professional prestige and larger patient loads. Those who relied solely on natural stamina and mental clarity were increasingly viewed as old-fashioned or inadequately committed to modern medical excellence. The economic incentives for physician pharmaceutical use were substantial. Drug companies offered doctors generous discounts on personal purchases of the same medications they prescribed to patients. Some pharmaceutical firms provided professional courtesy samples that allowed physicians unlimited access to new products. The relationship between medical practice and pharmaceutical consumption had become financially intertwined in ways that made objective evaluation of these substances nearly impossible. The correspondence between Victorian physicians reveals informal networks of what we would now recognize as prescription drug sharing and abuse. Dr. Blackwell's letters to colleagues include coded discussions of professional enhancement strategies and therapeutic optimization techniques that were essentially sophisticated drug trading arrangements between medical professionals. One particularly revealing letter from Dr. James Morrison of Boston, dated March 1804, includes detailed recommendations for managing the professional demands of modern medical practice through strategic pharmaceutical support. The letter describes specific dosing schedules, combination strategies, and techniques for maintaining peak professional performance through chemical means. The medical conferences of the era had become inadvertent pharmaceutical networking events where physicians would share experiences with different substances, compare effectiveness of various preparations, and coordinate access to new products. The American Medical Association's annual meetings included unofficial product evaluation sessions where doctors would discuss their personal experiences with medications they prescribed to patients